Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Hope you guys doing good. We've got a special show today here in the green room, and I'm joined by the Dr. Imran Rafiq. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Good, no shaking hands today.
Absolutely.
We're going to be talking about why that is the case. But before we do, inshallah, I wanted to, since we're coming out obviously from Islamic paradigm, if you like, there is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, إذا دخلتم بأرض أو إذا سمعتم بالطاعون بأرض فلا تدخلوها. If you hear of a plague in a country, so don't enter that country. وإذا وقع بأرض وأنتم بها فلا تخرجوا منها. And if it happens in a country whilst you're in it, so don't leave from that particular country or particular land, because ard could mean land. Meaning here, the prophetic advice for dealing with things which are infectious, things which are transmittable, things which can spread, is isolation. So that's the Islamic advice. Looking at the coronavirus as the example here, a quick question. First of all, what is the coronavirus? And a subsidiary question here is, to what extent now should we be thinking about isolation as a solution?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Alaikum salam.
Two very important questions, and I'm glad you started with the hadith, because really as Muslims we need to be thinking bigger than this crisis and thinking about our lives in a bigger picture.
Yes.
So some very basic questions. So what is the coronavirus? So coronaviruses are a family of viruses that have been around, that known for many years.
Yes.
They include things like SARS and MERS, which happened sort of 2003, 2012 to 17, which are sort of the more serious ones that we've heard about. But even the common cold falls into this as well.
Really?
Absolutely. So, and they're named after the shape. So they're shaped like a crown, hence the corona. Like a crown.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what's happened now is that there's been a mutation in a virus that's now transmissible amongst human beings. So this is started in Wuhan, Hubei province in China, and what really happened, we don't know the cause of this, but really from an animal virus, this has mutated slightly, and now become something that human beings can pass on to each other. And this virus is something that can spread quite readily. And that's the main danger from this. But it spreads quite readily. And also it affects people, particularly respiratorily, quite significantly. And so isolation is a very important step now. I mean, the government's announced this, and we can talk about the government advice in a moment. But really, there's a couple of things that happen. So because this virus is tiny, as you would expect. So a human hair is about 75 micrometers in size, or microns in size. This virus is 0.1 microns, so a thousandth, many-fold, at least 1,000 times less, many more fold. So it's something that's very tiny, and itself is, the way it's propagated is it enters your body, and this is important to understand. How is it doing this?
So how is it, you're covering here how it's actually transmitted? A lot of people do think it's airborne. Is it airborne?
So it's not airborne in the sense that the virus itself is traveling in the air.
Right, okay.
What happens is that when we cough or sneeze, we can generate some vapor from our mouths that can contain droplets of saliva. That in the saliva we can have the virus present. This will then do a couple of things. So one of the advices is to stay 1 meter, 2 meters apart, which is what we're trying to emulate here. And that's because that's probably the distance that if someone were to generate something, it would sort of fall down and settle before. So that's one thing.
Yes.
The second thing is, once these particles, so if you inhale those particles or you breathe them in, this is how they would attach to the membranes inside your mouth or inside your nose, and then find an entry into the body. The other mechanism that they enter is they fall onto surfaces, hard surfaces, soft surfaces, and the virus tends to last at varying times depending on the surface that it lands on. Depending on the surface, the time can vary. So people have given different times that you can, expect this virus to last. So anything between a few hours to a couple of days or longer. What then happens is we're going about our day-to-day business. We're touching hard surfaces, and then the virus is on our hands.
So it lasts for a maximum of 5 days, or?
So No one, that the data isn't clear.
Yeah.
So the thing to do is to assume that it's a long time.
Right.
So 2 to 3 days at least on any surface, although it could be, some people saying less than 24 hours. 3 to 6 hours is on a soft surface as well, because the soft surface is much more absorbent, so they tend to absorb things and you're less likely to get it by touching. Now, once you come into contact with that hard surface, you then have virus particles potentially on your hands. And this is where the hand washing is really important, because if you're touching things and then inadvertently our habits are to scratch our nose, face, eyes, it will find its way, the virus will find its way into our system through the mouth, through the eyes, through the nose, because of handling. So a couple of things to do: keep the hands below the shoulders if you can, so try not to reach up to your face, and also wash the hands often. And we're being told this sort of,
and to do that with soap.
Absolutely. And the reason, you're absolutely right. So the washing the hands with the soap is important because what the soap does is acts as a detergent, and the virus itself is surrounded by a lipid layer, so a layer of fat or oil, if you like. And what that does is it contains on there molecules that the virus can attach to molecules in the body and to enter the body. So if you use a detergent, what you're doing is you're removing this lipid layer, so the virus essentially becomes inactivated because of that process, and it can't have that effect. So the washing techniques are quite widely described. We can talk about that a little bit later if you like. But the key thing is to make sure you have a good lather, and you lather your hands well, and you wash for a certain length of time. 20 seconds is being described as minimum, but the longer the better, really.
So do face masks and stuff like that, does that help?
So that's a great question. And lots of people have been buying face masks. So face masks are helpful depending on who uses them. Like I said, the virus itself is tiny, and unless you have a mask that is able to inhibit that tiny particle from entering, the mask is not going to do very much. So what's the point of masks? So if you're a medical professional and you're in touch with patients all the time who may be coughing, who may have active symptoms, you're going to be at risk of having these particles that might be floating in the air from the coughing and the sneezing, and so you'd have a face visor with a mask that you'd use to prevent spread to yourself.
And is that effective?
That would be effective because you're minimizing the contact. You'd also have a gown, you'd have gloves, you'd be fully clothed with that, and you would change that whenever you come out of that environment, before you come out of that environment. So that's one set of masks that the health professionals would use. There are other masks which are like surgical masks. These don't have that fine filtering capacity, but what they do is they will prevent water droplets from entering that people can wear. And these would be people who are seeing someone who would be suspected of having the condition, so maybe GPs on the front line, etc., who would have this interaction. Mm-hmm. The average person on the street, should they be wearing a mask? Mm. So what you have to think about how this is transmitted and what the mask is forming. If you wear a mask, the only time it would be useful to wear it is if you're coughing yourself and you don't want to transmit these sputum particles or the vapor particles from the coughing to other people. So it's protecting other people from getting your virus that you already have because you're coughing.
So let's let people continue doing it then.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The wearing it yourself, if you're asymptomatic, probably you're going to increase the likelihood of touching your face. Yes. Because people adjust masks without realizing. They don't, obviously, once the mask becomes a bit saturated with fluid, it becomes ineffective. And so people tend to also, when they're eating, they tend to remove and eat, and you're essentially contaminating yourself more. It doesn't really serve a purpose. So it's counterintuitive, but wearing a mask if you're asymptomatic probably is not going to do too much for you.
I want to ask a question about now closing down masajid or mosques, or any other religious place for that matter. I mean, obviously Boris Johnson has come out and said that we should close pubs and leisure places and whatever. He hasn't. I don't think he's imposed any law just yet, which might be part of the problem, which we might actually discuss later on. But in terms of closing religious places, what's your advice on that?
So I think this is pretty clear.
Yes.
And
absolutely, you should close it down.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So any way that there's a gathering of people, there is an increased likelihood of spread.
Yes.
So we have a measure of spread in viruses. It's called the RO value.
It's called?
The RO value.
Yes.
Or R0 value, R0 value, people call it. This is really the number of people who will get the virus from any individual affected. So this virus has an RO value that sits between 2.5 and 3.5, so it's probably around about 3. So that means 3 people can get this virus from any one individual. So if you imagine there's one person with the virus, he'll give it to 3, who will then give it to 9, who will then give it to 27. You know how it's increasing.
Yes.
And this is one of the reasons why the virus can spread so rapidly. The other side of this virus, which makes it more likely to spread widely, is that its incubation time can be relatively long.
So how would you define an incubation time? What is an incubation time?
Great question. So an incubation time is the time you can have the virus in your system without showing symptoms. So if you have a cold, for example, within a couple of days, you're going to be sneezing.
And is the incubation time, I mean, a lot of people say, okay, you're going to be asymptomatic before actually showing obviously symptoms. But when, say for instance, you have got the disease and the symptoms now subside, you no longer have the symptoms, could you still be prone to infecting other people after having the disease?
Okay, so let's start from the other end of it.
Yes.
So the incubation time can be up to 14 days.
Right.
The average, the people are presenting with symptoms, seems to be about 5 days. So but it can vary quite a lot. There is some evidence that you can be transmitting the virus even before you're symptomatic, which is one of the reasons why this can be spread so widely.
Yes.
So there's that aspect of it.
What about afterwards?
So this is a great question.
Yes.
So let's talk about how the virus will affect the average person who recovers. Okay?
Yes.
Because the vast majority of people, 80%, will
get the virus.
Will recover from having the virus. Okay?
Well, you're being very hopeful with that.
So I mean, this is in Allah's hands, but looking at the statistics.
Are you talking about the UK or worldwide?
So the average person.
Yeah.
So we'll come to specific subpopulations within the population in a second.
Yes.
But if you look at the average person, so 80% of the people who will get the virus will recover after having an illness. And I'll describe that illness a little bit. So you have fever, which can be quite raised and persistent. Cough. So your cough, usually it's dry but a small percentage of people, it can actually be a cough that's productive. You feel very fatigued, so muscle aches, and you feel very tired. And then you can also get a feeling of shortness of breath, and that tends to come later. So initially, first 3 or 4 days, you can be having a fever or the cough, and then the fatigue can also set in at that time. And then towards the day 5 and 6, you'll start to get the shortness of breath.
What about fatigue by itself, for example?
So fatigue by itself is not on its own, wouldn't be something you'd consider.
Right. I had that yesterday. So.
You're trying to coffee or lack of coffee.
No coffee.
So if by day 7 your shortness of breath is improving, that means you're one of those people who're probably going to recover from this. The people who then develop complications, they start after day 7.
Which are usually people over the age of, 60, 70?
So we can come back to that demographic in just 1 second.
Yes.
So the people that tend to deteriorate, what happens to them is that their shortness of breath becomes worse, and they will find that they're getting the fatigue is becoming worse, and that there are lots of signs of that. So they may not be able to speak in a sentence, complete a sentence or something like this. They maybe it's affecting them enough to stop them from drinking well or eating well, and these are the people who would be someone who'd be deteriorating, and you'd be seeking help from 111 or your health professionals at that time when the person is not showing improvement after day 7. So that's sort of the timeline of this. Now, who is affected the most, and which is the question you're asking about. So this is a really great question, because actually it gives us the information to know who is it that needs to protecting the most. So potentially everyone can get infected. So there's no one who is non-infectable, if you like. Everyone can be infected by this virus. Most people under the age of 60 tend to recover well from it. They have the symptoms I've described, but they'll recover from that. As the age level increases, the degree of people who succumb to the virus, who die from the virus, increases. So people over the age of 70, they tend to be a high proportion of these. So 17% of them, maybe even 20% of these people can succumb to the virus, can die from it, which is quite a big potentially quite a big number. And they said these are our most vulnerable groups. Now, it doesn't mean that you have no deaths in the other groups. So there are deaths in the other groups, but they're much lower in their frequency, and there's probably some underlying condition. Even the people who have this that are younger that are dying. The commonest underlying things are things like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and any other lung problems generally. So if you're a smoker, if you have underlying lung conditions, because the virus essentially is affecting the lungs. So I hope that's useful. Was that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, what I wanted to ask you about now really is I've been doing a little bit of research. This is certainly not my field, but this is why we brought you here.
Okay.
Obviously, you're at the front lines. You're dealing with this, and you're qualified to talk about medicine. And having said that, I just wanted to kind of put out there that I've been looking at some papers from other countries. From Korea, from China, from Belgium, and it seems that they have a drug which they have seen some effect in, which is it's called
hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, hydroxychloroquine. Yeah. Now, my question is, okay, fine. First of all, why is the NHS not suggesting this drug? Why is it not suggested in other parts of the Western world? We're finding it in some parts of the Western world, not other parts of the Western world. I mean, according to those journals I've looked at, including Nature, many journals, in fact, medical journals that I've looked at, it seems to have an effective effect on at least a sample group that they've looked at. So why is it that we're not seeing that? For my understanding now, in the NHS, the only thing that they can actually offer is gas and ventilation. They're not offering drugs. So why is that?
So that's a great question. So since the outbreak happened in China,
yes,
in November, December time in 2019, lots of different agents have been trialed to see if they're having an effect on people. So chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, antiretrovirals have been tried to see if they make a difference to this.
Yes.
And even some people are giving high dose vitamin C, etc., to see if this is having an effect on the virus.
Yes.
At the moment, having looked at some of these articles, the information is very anecdotal, and people are really trialing to see if they can have an effect. And once there's something that's established and proven to have an effect, this would be something that would be rolled out. But at the moment, we're not on,
the reason
on
why
that level.
I want to push this point just a little bit is because it seems when I looked at the Korean Biomedical Review, okay, if giving one example, and Korea is one of those countries that seems to be handling this much better than the UK. According to the Korean Biomedical Review, as well as some Chinese journals, according to also a journal in Belgium, that they're saying that this is the go-to drug and that there is actually some effect on participants when they've actually tried this drug. Those two in particular, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. So why is it the case now that, is there maybe a monetary or economic reason for not bringing this drug into the UK or to other parts of the Western world? Or do you think that, is it the case maybe that they haven't looked into it, or it's very difficult for me to conclude that they haven't looked into it. It's public information. So why is it that the different countries are dealing with this medicinally in a different way? That's my question.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. This is a bit of a controversial question.
Okay.
So what I would say is that these drugs are not new.
Okay.
They've been around for a very long time.
Right.
So hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine have been. Chloroquine is a malaria treatment. Hydroxychloroquine is used for people with sort of autoimmune conditions.
Right.
And they've been around for a very long time, and they're here already in the sense that we don't have to bring them in or anything like that at all. And they're not very expensive either. So these two things aren't really cost related.
Okay.
And if you look at what the government are doing in terms of trying to put in lots of money to try and help people through this process because of the reduction in sort of the going to work and earning money to pay your bills that we can anticipate for the next 2 or 3 months or possibly longer. The government are doing a lot in terms of helping financially to limit the effect of this on people. What we're finding, if we're comparing different countries, what we would be doing is comparing methodologies to this.
Yes.
And you're right, this is experiential based in the sense that we've never had this experience before. Similar things, SARS in 2003 and then MERS, which was in 2012 sort of time, for about 4 or 5 years. Countries in those regions have experience of dealing with similar types of viruses in the past. And so they may have had contingencies which they would use. The approach that the UK have gone for has been different. The UK government has gone for has been different. And there are different reasons for this. So I completely agree that the greater the isolation that we have, so self-isolation and social distances that we carry out, the greater the mitigation of the curve.
Yes.
And what we mean by that is that there will be if the virus was left unchecked and nobody did anything, there would be a large rise an exponential rise in cases.
And deaths,
and absolutely unrelated deaths, because, we were talking about the number of people that would die. We're talking about, maybe 5%, probably less. They're probably saying about 1%, but no one really knows where this is going. But if you look at if 80% of people recover from this, 15 to 20% enter a hospital, 5% will become critical. That means they would need ITU or intensive help with their breathing.
Yes.
And a third of those people may die. We're still talking about 2% possibly of people who are affected by this ending up with death as the outcome.
Yes.
So numbers could potentially be quite high, and the government are talking about minimising it to 20,000. I mean, that's just...
What, talking about fatalities?
Fatalities. I mean,
in what span are we talking about?
Over the next 3 months, 2 to 3 months.
Really?
And if you imagine, this is almost like a best case scenario. We're mitigating it down to that level. So this is definitely a very serious problem and unprecedented in the history. Now, one thing that this has done, alhamdulillah, which is a positive thing, is that's brought us together as a nation, and even as a world, because everyone is collaborating and we're trying to work the best way forward, and we should be looking outward to our communities to try and help us, all those people, particularly the vulnerable, as much as we can. And this is really our Islamic ethos, that we're not an individual, we're a community. And the community is beyond, and we have and the community has has rights over us, and we have responsibilities.
And it's like, this hadith that we started off the show with. It says, if you are in a country or in a land, right? It doesn't say if you're in a Muslim land, which is important, because it seems like the maslaha that's being understood here, or the common interest here, is this is for the fellow man. You don't want to infect. It's not just, okay, this is our community and this is the rest. No, we want everyone to be... This advice that we're hopefully trying to give today, and these questions, important questions and analyses that we're putting forward, are in the best interest, hopefully, of everyone that's listening, not just Muslim community.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So, and just to sort of follow that further.
Yeah.
So, we have to look at why the approaches may be different. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So, one of the main reasons that the approach has been taken this way in this country is that the idea is to somehow keep the number of people who become infected at any one time as much as we can below the capacity for the NHS to treat, which is going to be difficult to do.
That's another consideration.
Absolutely, it's going to be difficult to do. So, and the other thing to bear in mind is that there will be a rebound effect from containment. So all of the countries that are doing lots of containing and they're bringing it down, when they lift their measures of containment, there will be a resurgence of the number of cases, because the virus wouldn't have had time to clear yet.
That's one of the things I wanted to actually ask you about then, because this is what one of the scientific advisors, I forget his name, but this idea that it's good for X amount of people in the community to have this, so there can be immunity for the whole country or something. But my question here is, immunity doesn't work. I mean, to what extent, maybe I shouldn't say this, to what extent does immunity work in groups? Because the way that the phraseology that he uses is almost as if all of the population is one person. So it's like, okay, it's good for some people in the community to have it, because then that will give our country immunity. But then how does that actually work?
There's a problem with this idea of herd immunity.
Okay, good.
The problem is, there are a few problems actually.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of these. So we don't know the level of immunity required as a percentage to give herd immunity. So herd immunity, let me explain herd immunity first.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So if you give enough, the idea is that if you inoculate enough people against the virus, so if you take a vaccine like the flu vaccine that we give to people who are vulnerable, if we inoculate enough people in the community from the virus, then what happens is when the virus is spreading, it's more likely to come into contact with somebody who's immune to it and therefore will not spread it further. So what you do is this growth that you would see, so 1 person to 3 people to 9 people.
So it's the opposite of the multiplier effect.
Absolutely. It would dampen the multiplier effect and reduce the amount of transmission.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know where this number is. Is it 40%, 50%, 60%, 80%, 90%? We don't actually know this number.
The government wants to tell you that the only way to find out is to try it, isn't it?
So that's one. The other thing is we don't know actually if this is a virus that you can be completely immune to, in the sense of some viruses change on a yearly basis. So we have a yearly flu jab, for example, and that's because the virus has changed from year to year, and and the vaccine is adjusted to the new virus that's present. And there also have been some anecdotal reports from places like China and Japan of people who have had the virus in them after they've recovered. So we don't know if this is reinfection or not, which is worrying. The general understanding is if you have the virus and you recover from it, you generate an immune response and you'd be immune to that. That level is now to do this it's a risky strategy in the sense that what you're saying is that you're going to allow to a certain extent the virus to be spread amongst the more robust people in your society. Yeah. So this is, and we'll summarize with this as well at the end, because I would like to summarize the advice just so that people are aware of what to do. So for those over 70, they're being asked to isolate themselves. They will be asked to do this in the next coming days for 3 months, 12 weeks, which is a long time. Now, personally, I would advocate, even if you're able to do that, start that straight away as soon as you can. So I have an elderly parent at home.
Yes.
Who has a heart condition, diabetes, who would fall into the high risk category.
What are you doing about that?
So I've already asked them to stay at home.
No other relatives are coming to see them?
I've asked my siblings even not to come and attend to see her, because my mum's at home with me. Because
is it just you that goes and sees her then?
So she lives in the home with the family, but has her own place, and so we're trying to mitigate. And anyone who we feel may have symptoms, if they do develop them, we would keep that person in a separate place, as their own room, their own bathroom, ideally.
Bathroom? Sorry, I thought you were going to put them in the bathroom.
Sure, no, their own room and access to their own bathroom if you can.
Yes.
So we'll talk, and I think it's important to talk about what this means. So if you have symptoms, how to isolate. But we need to sort of structure it a bit, because I don't want the information to get so lost. So the other advice. So that's one thing for the elderly. 3 months, stay at home. Don't interact if you can with people. If you're able to get people to
3 months.
3 months. So one of the things I did as a Muslim, because we have to look at things from our worldview.
Yes.
So our neighbours have a right over us, and we have a responsibility to them. So one of the things that's very important is we went along our road, knocked on the houses of the elderly that we know. How are you? Is there anything that you need? Are you having difficulty?
So you're trying to spread the disease, are you?
So good point.
Yeah.
So what you would do is you'd knock on the door, make sure that you're not going in. You're sort of standing back a couple of meters, and you just have that conversation with them. These are my contact details. If you get stuck with anything, if you need help, call us. If you need help with your shopping, and help the people who are vulnerable. So one experience I had with this was an elderly lady who was 89.
Wow.
And she said to me that, it doesn't matter her background. She wasn't Muslim, but what I'm saying is, our viewpoint as Muslims shouldn't be, like you said, religious specific. Which this is for everyone.
Yes.
So what she said to me was, something quite made me smile. Actually, she said, "When I cough, I drink lemonade, and I can only carry 1 bottle at a time. Could you get me some bottles of lemonade?" So I said, no problem at all. And that was her only request, because she physically couldn't carry the weight. So when my next round, whenever I was going shopping, we just got some and we gave them to her. For her, that was a big thing. Wow. Also giving contact numbers. So there's a community network of people who can sort of help whoever needs help.
So selflessness, being very selfless here.
This is a condition.
Because we're seeing videos of people beating each other up for
toilet roll, subhanAllah. So this is a condition that does not respect whether you're Muslim, non-Muslim, white, black, brown, British, non-British. This is affecting everyone on the world, and in a way,
it only discriminates against the old.
We are equal in its eyes, literally equal in its eyes. So we have to know that as Muslims we have this concept of qadr,
which is predestination.
Our time of birth and time of death are written.
That's right.
You have to, and this is a time where we have to sort of do our best in the sight of Allah. And one of our responsibilities is to look after the people around you. We're not an individual or a society, and we should be acting in a social way. So people who are hoarding food, etc., are making it difficult for the elderly to sort of get access to food. This is not Islamic, and we should be avoiding this.
Yes.
So this is one thing. So
another thing I wanted to ask on that point, actually, because a lot of people will be at home, and they'll be thinking about the existential questions. What is the purpose of life? What am I doing here? I mean, they've got, in many countries now, the lockdown has started like as an official policy. So when people are at home now and thinking about the existential questions, what is the purpose of life? what kind of things should they be thinking about now? I mean, sometimes you've got to look at the bright side of things, right? Optimistically, looking at, if I'm not going to go to the club or the pub or go this place or that place, or feel, the noise of everyday life is kind of quietened down, what kind of existential questions would you recommend for any human being to kind of think about when they're at home, just thinking, contemplating about life, purpose of God?
So that's a really beautiful question.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to that because I just want to finish off the other point that I was making. So we talked about isolating the elderly.
Right.
Okay, that was really important for 3 months. Anyone in the house that has a cough, cold or fever.
Yes.
Cough or a fever. So a new or continuous cough and a fever.
Yes.
Should stay at home. That whole household should isolate for 14 days. So that means really not going out, even within the home.
Do you think 14 days is, because, I mean, once again, going back to the governmental skepticism here, like, when they say 7 days or 14 days, this is the government line, right? Why should it be? I mean, it's very arbitrary. Once again, how much do they know of this disease to give such precise dates? Why not longer?
Sure. So we talked about the incubation period.
Yes.
So most people at day 5 will present with symptoms. The outliers of this, so the longest you can have it without presenting with symptoms would be about 14 days. So by that time, you would really know if you have this or not. And if anyone has the symptoms, the whole household should isolate, because people may develop the symptoms at different times for 14 days.
Yes.
And that's really the advice there. If there's an elderly person in the house with a family, you should take extra care that person is sort of protected and kept away from the rest of the family as well. So that's really the advice. So fever or new cough, stay at home for 14 days as a family. And if you think about that, this is another way of bringing people out, children out from school, because lots of families they have children. So if any single person develops a cough, you would keep that whole family away. And so lots of schools are also making that decision now themselves, that actually so many people are at home that we're going to close down doing online teaching, which is what's happening quite widely. And we'll find probably as things progress that will be the advice that comes in. Yeah. So those are the important things. Now, your question is probably one of the most important questions that you ask about the existential questions. There are things that we're told that trials bring us closer to the Creator, and this is one of the things that is, Islamically we believe. And what we're seeing, actually, a lot of people are asking these questions: why me? Why now? What is it all about? And they're asking about the value of their life in the whole system of things. If I'm over 60, will I be treated or not? These sort of questions are going through their minds. Am I not of value? And this is probably, if you talk about a positive that may come from this whole corona crisis that we're going through, is that people are now asking the bigger questions about how they live their lives. And these questions are very important. And this is where, if there's an opportunity to for people who are giving dawah, or who get to speak to neighbours or people who are worried about this, can give their perspective on the bigger picture. That we're not born purposeless, and we're not born without a reason, and we're here for a finite time, and our time is written. And really, in this time, we have to do the best that we can for ourselves and for fellow man, in the service of the Creator. So at submitting our will to the will of the Creator. And I think that if anything gives, when I've been speaking to my children at home, who are worried about coronavirus, and they're hearing everything in the news, one of the things we talk about is qadr, and we talk about as Muslims, how we would interact with any calamity that comes our way. And one of the things is we have to have tawakkul of Allah, because ultimately we're seeing a tiny creature that cannot be seen by the human eye.
Yes.
Really affecting all human beings in a devastating way at the moment.
Yes.
And we have to, and ultimately, because our health systems will become overwhelmed by this, they won't be able to cope with this. If you're of that belief, that you believe in a Creator, that's where your final things would turn. In a similar way to somebody who has a parent or a family member who's dying, the medical profession gets to the stage where it says, there's nothing we can do. People usually at that stage then turn to the one who can do anything. And I think this is important for us to be aware that the existential questions are now being asked more and more by society, and hopefully this will lead to a better society overall. May Allah bless the elderly and protect them and protect everyone from this coronavirus. these essential questions are being asked, and this is the time when people who are in your field should be really speaking to the people on this level about this, because I think it'll have an impact.
Well, thank you very much. With that, actually, the IERA, here at IERA, we're doing a viral awakening campaign, which we're going to try and obviously make things as easy as possible, give people something to think about in their time off if they are in lockdown, with these ultimate questions or existential questions. What is the purpose of life? Sometimes, things like these, opportunities like these, where we have time to contemplate and not be distracted by the noise of life, think about these deeper questions, can actually be the game changers, the transformative moments of people's lives, which actually puts them over the edge in terms of knowing what their purpose of life is and knowing what to do. And with that, I thank you very much for coming over and give us fantastic advice, and all of those points I think will be of great benefit to communities all around the world. And until next time, make sure you to like and subscribe on this channel, inshallah. Once again, just to remind you to look out for the viral campaign by IERA, which will be coming out. And with that, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.